Welcome all to the latest Sportico Live. Those who've attended before, I swung my camera the other way so you get the different view of my living room. I appreciate you all being with us in the middle of the day. We do appreciate you giving us your time and attention. We know both are very valuable. We think we got a great program for you today. And allow me to indulge you, if you will, on a story from about 2 decades ago where I spoke to an NFL player who was pursuing an MBA. And he told me that he didn't want anybody to know because the culture of the locker room was such that the coach didn't want his players distracted by anything. And he thought it would actually hurt his standing with his coach if the coach knew that he was pursuing an MBA. We have come a very long way from those days where athletes are pursuing all sorts of off-field ventures. And it's hard to top the folks we have today. Joining us, we have Cy Young Award winner, Trevor Bauer, Major League Baseball pitcher, of course. We have Paul Rabil, co-founder of the Premier Lacrosse League, and my longtime, used to have black hair, friend, Rick Burton from Syracuse University, my alma mater. Rick, in able hands, I will allow you to take it away with these two fine athletes.
Hey, thanks so much, Scott. And guys, Paul, Trevor, I've been looking forward to this, not to talk about your accomplishments with both of you. That's pretty well known, I would hope, but more to give Trevor a chance to talk about his dot slider or his reverse slider and, the fact that at one point he had 19 different pitches. The way I like to moderate is to wish that we were in a bar right now having a couple of beers and that people were getting a chance to just look in on something really informal. And my job is to let you guys do all the talking. So let me start it off with kind of a softball type question, which is, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Netflix, Amazon. There's a famous scene of Vince Lombardi looking out on the football field and saying, "What the hell is going on out there?" This platform, this topic we've got today, media platforms for 21st century athletes. Let me ask, what the hell is going on out there? So I'll start with you, Trevor, and let's see where it goes.
First off, it sounds like a Jeopardy column. I'll take what the hell's going on out there for 500. But no, it's quite the landscape right now. It's changing more rapidly than it has. It's accelerating. The changes and the differences are just coming quicker and quicker, and new platforms are popping up all over the place. And I still don't understand the TikTok scene as well. I'm like, my age is starting to show. I still feel like I'm pretty young, but all the young kids are like, "Oh, TikTok this, and did you see that on TikTok?" I'm like, "Oh no, I guess I'll have to download it and look."
So does that create more demand on athletes today to have to figure out what platforms they should be on or which platforms they can best leverage? It's like you could have, let's say, gotten good on Twitter and someone says, Twitter's outdated or Facebook doesn't matter anymore. You've got to be on, and then you fill in the blank. Paul, your thoughts on that? Because you're trying to build a league from the ground up. I have to imagine that having your players really active on social media is going to be key to the league's success.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Rick and Scott. Great intro. Trevor and I actually connected on his YouTube channel, so nice start to this as we connected digitally through platforms. And I would say that this isn't a layup question. This is a super complex question that I think the way that I think about it is two separate entities. So how athletes think about social and how leagues think and should think about social are different. And that has a lot to do with what we've seen transition in traditional media to modern media over the last decade in particular, with cord cutting and kind of on-demand appointment television watching on broadcast, to now, by and large, like the properties and the networks went from having the leverage to now having to be where their audience is. It used to be the other. The audience used to have to schedule out an appointment where their favorite properties are. The on-demand era and SVOD and OTT era made it like, let's go where our audience is. I think with athletes, there are a few exceptions, but I would encourage athletes to go to the platform that they feel most comfortable and see the most success in, and drill down and be really great on that platform. lot of famous journalists and authors find a ton of success on Twitter, and we can quabble around 300 million monthly actives versus 1 billion. And like, well, you could be in front of 1 billion if you were on Instagram. Well, 300 million is a pretty large number, last I checked. And if you have the ability to go viral every time you tweet and your core audience is there, well, maybe you should just be on Twitter all the time. And TikTok is the latest avenue for what has started as a Gen Z native platform, but now is, especially as the operators at TikTok are trying to create an environment that brings on more millennials and Gen Xers, and they're shifting away, or they're attempting to still recognize and validate the dancing videos and the lip syncing, but they're also inviting, frankly, more of a Twitter style format where news can break there. So it's important as a league to be where your audience is, and that means being omnipresent on all the platforms and figuring out the right strategy to do that. But for players or personalities or celebrities, figure out where your voice is most authentic and then drill down, go long on that 1 to 3.
Yeah, I think that's you bring up a really good point. I wanted to mention something there is just understanding what each platform is suited for. I started off on Twitter because I had, I guess, what they'd be considered now as hot takes, right? You send out your 140 characters, and I'm pretty good at being witty like that, but I'm not good at taking pictures and like fashion or anything like that. So Instagram's a little bit more difficult for me because my skill sets, my interests don't align perfectly with that audience. I'm big on YouTube. I love YouTube. I watch YouTube all the time, so I understand that space a little bit more, and I think that a lot of times my sense of humor may come across better on YouTube on video when people can get a full sense of it, as opposed to maybe just 140 characters on Twitter. So just understanding which platforms perform best with different personality types and different interests. People that are really into cooking, you probably need to show a little bit more of what that cooking process is. Maybe that's YouTube. People who are into kind of just short hot take type of things or like hype videos, maybe that's a TikTok. The audiences on those different platforms are going to those platforms for different reasons. And as an athlete, aligning your skill set and your interests with the audience that is most interested in those things is the opportunity for most growth.
I want to go back to something that Paul said. The modern athlete has got to adapt to media. But let's say, Paul, that the games are still being set at fixed time. The game is at 7. When's an athlete supposed to optimize the opportunity to be their own media outlet, to be their own network? My game is going to go from 7 to 10. I got to go back into the locker room and do something. Am I getting online at midnight, or am I getting into my platform the next day? How do you think the fixed nature of when the game happens versus when you record or activate?
Well, I think close development is the highest engaged with time to post, and athletes have to balance engagement as a metric to success with integrity of performance and focus. The reality is, in Scott's intro to the segment here, was around the shift of relationship perhaps between athletes and ownership, or athletes and GMs, and recognizing that athletes are now investing in not just companies and startups, but also their own social media. But you have to kind of protect the sanctity of the game if you want to continue to have long-term, I think, value as an athlete. But know that the wider halo, I think, is still powerful inside of 24 hours. So you don't have to rush to the locker room and post. And then the halo even beyond that is the season. So if you look at side-by-side comparisons of engagement across all leagues, it's actually in season when you're most valuable. And it's not that, like right now, for example, football is popping off and this is their engaged time. It's not that people care less about the Premier Lacrosse League, but these apps are actually, and these platforms are actually about total watch time per day. So we log in on average 40 to 45 times on Instagram every day, and the average YouTube watcher spends 20 minutes a day watching content. So if we're in the fall, winter, and we have football going on, that 20 minutes of total watch time on YouTube is probably going to be sucked up 12 minutes to the NFL. And then as you see vloggers continue to increase their time, the Paul brothers went from posting 8-minute daily vlogs to 20-minute, and same thing with Gary Vaynerchuk, because they understand that watch time. Now all of a sudden, the tertiary leagues that are not in season are fighting over 2 minutes of available eye time for a fan that still likes lacrosse. So keeping that in perspective and then building a strategy around when you're in season, how to capitalize, to your point, Rick. I think those big moments, the team accounts and the leagues need to hit them immediately because they're the ones behind punching the keys. And then the players have 24 hours, I think, to really capitalize, and in some cases extended, but they have the whole season.
Trevor, you got the thing going with Momentum and Players TV. You and Griff, I think we're doing some work in that space. Talk a little bit about your thoughts there on those, call them platforms, but let's call them properties.
Yeah, I think it's really important for athletes to control their content and their narrative. I think, traditionally when you think about media, it started off in journalism and writing, and people just don't really read anymore. And so now it's a lot of video content. But athletes now, with all these platforms that are out there, are able to kind of control their narrative. And so that's one thing that really spoke to me about Players TV is the ability to control that narrative, but also get into a wide audience, and talk about expanding your reach nationwide. If you have all baseball players in one place, then every baseball fan has a reason to come get that content. Traditionally, the power of an ESPN or an MLB network or something like that is like, okay, well, I have my social media following and people follow me in, let's say, Cleveland and in Cincinnati. I'm in Ohio, but how do I get in front of fans in Anaheim? How do I get in front of fans in New York? And centralizing all of that content where the athletes own it, they can dictate their narrative. They can produce the side of the story that they want to show to fans, and the authentic nature of who they are, and not let someone else dictate it is super important. So with Players TV, just understanding, like, if you get all the athletes in one collective and you bring all sports fans into one area, you can get you can drive the audience up and get a lot more exposure. I think Players TV is going to be in 100 million households here soon. So that's a tremendous amount of eyeballs on sports. Kind of to Paul's point, you in a way can weed out some of the competing content because the people who are really interested in sports come specifically for sports. So now maybe some of those 20 minutes of watch time, like you were mentioning, Paul, instead of going to a viral YouTube video that has a clickbait title about something where you spend 3 of your minutes watching that, when you go to Players TV or platforms like that, you're on Samsung TV, you're on different areas, you're just watching sports in general. So someone who goes there for baseball may see those 3 minutes of watch time may go to an NBA player, and now he has a lot more exposure. And athletes can kind of pass the audiences back and forth, which is good for everyone involved and really helps push forward the what I'd like to see happen in the space, which is athletes being their own production companies, being their own media outlets, and controlling that narrative. Because I think when you look at the engagement rates when athletes post something versus when a league posts something, it's ridiculous. 10 times more engagement, 10 times more interesting to the fan than it is coming from the same post coming from a league or an entity like a Sports Center or ESPN or something like that. So that's really the direction I'd love to see it go, and that's really what we're trying to do with Momentum, specifically in the baseball space too, is just get all baseball fans, like, here's baseball content, baseball fans, you want baseball content, here it is, and for players to be able to market themselves and get their message out.
The same thing, I think, for lacrosse and lacrosse fans. Paul, let's take a second to talk about role of sponsors and all of this. I got a text just before we went on from a really good friend at Nike, and it reminds me to ask you guys about the role of sponsors and how they matter to athletes in the 21st century.
Well, it's a great question. If you think about the two largest revenue buckets in pro sports, it's media and sponsors, and then the two are really becoming more and more integrated because of modern media, and that being social media. I guess I'll say one thing, and this was related to the build of the PLL, is sponsorships in a traditional environment in sports, they were tied to long terms and trade of image and likeness for cash product compensation, a lot of static assets in place. And in pro sports, what that means is on field, LED boards, PA call outs, and then on the media side, spot and dots, 30-second ads, as well as in-game integrations. For athletes, it was, your image and likeness going to be on a can if you're with Pepsi, or it could potentially be on the website if you're with a startup like Built Bar. So all of that, I think, is now being replaced for more like bespoke, what we're seeing, content campaigns. So shorter terms, no lockups, still great cash compensation. You're going to get product. But what brands are looking to do is accomplish two things. And I'll make it difficult to describe this scenario because I think we all know the value of endemic brands, right? People who make lacrosse product, makes a ton of sense for them to sponsor the PLL and sponsor PLL athletes because kids and customers are going to look at what the pros play. If you look at the non-endemic categories, which are highly competitive and what all the leagues compete for, you look at, consumer packaged goods, you look at quality service restaurants, financial services, insurance, real estate. So it becomes more about storytelling and really, like, I think, unique integrative plans across not only league and team accounts, but player accounts. And so we created this kind of turnkey model as a true single entity organization. It's all the forest with the trees and the progress of where brands are getting off the, kind of on the heels of what we had just talked about, the more personalization that pro sports are becoming, and that going to where your audience already is just a shift towards where dollars are being allocated. And as we learn more about the important metrics and how to value interactions versus impressions, cadence posts, as well as the source of the content, where it's being delivered, and the authenticity and the type of platform, you're seeing, I think, leagues and teams and athletes that are winning right now during this shift. They just fully understand not just their audience, but how to interact with their audience around specific platforms. And I'm seeing more and more deals get cut on 30-day windows versus 365.
Yeah, a really interesting point. And it's funny to me, you bring up this concept of analytics. And Trevor, you guys deal with analytics on the baseball side probably more than lacrosse at the moment, although I'm sure that's coming, where GMs are now measuring everything. And it seems to me an athlete is not only going to know their performance analytics, now they've got to know their social media analytics. And if they're not keeping up with both of those, I think they're probably at risk. But before I go any further with that, let me get this piece out of the way, and let's use Sportico as a platform. There are people probably watching that want to know, you mentioned Cincinnati and Cleveland, whether or not you're going to go to New York or LA or Cincinnati. So let's get the Mets thing up on the table so Sportico gets the benefit from it. Anything you want to share with the world via Sportico?
Yeah, I don't have any major announcements right now. I do want to emphasize that I think that what Steve Cohen is doing in his brief time after taking over the organization is really impressive. I think he's, having an owner that's active on social media and engaging with the fan base, asking the fan base, what do you want to see, what players you want me to go after, stuff like that. Regardless of how much impact that's making on his decisions, it's just really cool to be embracing, kind of what we're talking about here with it, which is finding where your audience is and interacting with the fans and connecting with them, and using that to promote business. I mean, the excitement in the Mets fan base right now is probably, she's got to be close to an all-time high, or at least a recent high for sure. And just continuing to extend that halo, like Paul mentioned earlier, like signing or purchasing a team and coming on and you take over. 3 days later, people can forget about it. But he's done a great job of extending that excitement for the Mets out. It's permeated through the fan bases, it's permeated through baseball and through players. I've had many conversations with players this offseason. They're like, hey, what do you think of Steve Cohen and the Mets and this and that and the other, and what's going on? And I think it's really cool. And like, players are taking notice, right? So now by using social media and doing a couple of these small things, you've just created interest in the Mets organization, lasting interest. It's become a destination,
Well, I'm in Syracuse, and the Mets AAA team is up here. And while I wouldn't wish rehab on you, if you ever have to go through Syracuse for a Mets thing, we'll come out and watch you play. Paul, Trevor brings up a really interesting point about owners using social media. You're practically the commissioner of a league, certainly the co-founder. What are your thoughts on the league as a co-founder needing to use social media to pick up market share?
It's a great question, and it's tricky. And I think there are two sides to it, just as there is for athletes. One thing that we didn't mention is, if an athlete wants to be active on social, it usually takes 1 to 2 forms: them showing their workout routine, their practices. Chris Brickley is like a big up and coming social phenomenon who is an NBA trainer. His accounts popped off, and the best NBA players in the world go to his gym in Manhattan to train. And so you're seeing James Harden practice, and he's posting it. If James Harden doesn't perform, he's going to catch a lot of flack. There's athletes that don't self-promote, in air quotes, themselves, that when they don't perform, they're not going to catch the flack. So there's always double side, right? And I think with ownership groups, it didn't start in sports. It may not have started with Mark Cuban, or the Mark Cuban is kind of the dual threat. I think it started with this romanticism of entrepreneurship over the last decade and a half that we've seen, and like the celebration of these unicorn tech founders and how that has become the next celebrity. So with sports owners and these billion-dollar valuations, there's a big opportunity to jump in the narrative and build a fan base and potentially get a new fan base. The flip side is that, you are the acting kind of authoritative figure for that organization, and different than athletes, your share of voice on behalf of a team or a league is held to a different standard of neutrality and understanding. If we think about the last 6 months in 2020, which have been more challenging than any other year any of us, I think, have experienced, we've seen a huge, I don't even want to call it reemergence, because athletes have always been, I believe, at the epicenter of humanitarian rights and social justice. But we've seen that uptick, and it's made its way into leagues. But I will say, we don't see Adam Silver or Roger Goodell on social media. And I think there is value in that level of kind of absence or neutrality, and allowing that kind of that positioning of equality across consumer sentiment. And athletes, just like any individual, is given more of that opportunity to take on risk, but also stand to what they believe in. Properties, I think, have traditionally been more neutral. So you have to understand kind of I think first authentically where you stand, and then secondarily the risk of going out and kind of the net win. Nike's another case study. When they did the first Colin Kaepernick ad, they built a business model behind, as a brand, losing a consumer base that disagreed with, I think, the political hijacking of Black Lives Matter, but they recognized, kind of where their consumer was, and made a decision to do what they thought was right.
Yeah, it's a great point. Trevor, I hate to use a hockey metaphor, but Gretzky was always famous for skating to where the puck was going rather than where it was. Thoughts on what we're going to see 2, 3, 5 years from now in terms of media platforms for athletes, and this concept of the business beyond the game?
Yeah, I think that's going to expand a lot. I think athletes viewing themselves as media outlets and entities, that's kind of the future. That's where I see it going. In order to get there, though, there has to be an amount of education around how to do it, how to develop your brand in the early stages, so you can be consistent and be authentic with it. Some of the positives and the negatives, and so the athlete can make the decision of weighing, like, do I want to put myself out there more and take those shots, or do I want to shrink back a little bit? And even if you aren't super active on social media, there's ways to use it in a way that you can still accomplish some of the entrepreneurial side of things. You can still have an outlet. But I do think that the education is the biggest portion, and some of the culture, shifts that you mentioned to start this call off, where players weren't encouraged 10 to 15 years ago to get an MBA, to be in business, to be a multifaceted entity. Now it's more so that way. It's more so it's shifting in the direction where that's encouraged or promoted. it's still not all the way there yet. And certainly if you look at the different leagues and different entities around, some are better than others. I think the NBA, probably MMA is leading the charge on individualism and promoting the individual athlete. NBA is right there. Baseball and hockey are kind of, lagging behind in that way. And it's cultural in the sport. Like you mentioned, it's, if you do social media, you're not focused on the game. That's kind of the perception of it. But I think you see, because that is the situation, that the athletes that do embrace it and are able to balance being good on the field and maximizing their platform during their playing career have so much room for growth. It's like kind of this, your early adopter stage where you can really just, blow up because not a whole lot of people are doing it. In 5 years, 10 years, I think a lot of athletes will have YouTube channels. Hopefully a lot of athletes will kind of forego YouTube and go to Players TV and have that centralized content and stuff like that. But they'll start viewing themselves more that way. They'll understand that in season is the time to get your message out and to really maximize that growth and the power that growth has in the future, whether it's monetarily, whether it's opportunity in life, if it's life experience, if it's helping people. Like the more you are able to build that during your playing career, during the season when all eyes are on you, the more successful you'll be in whatever venture it is you want to get into, whatever drives you forward. And ultimately, I don't see like any new platforms necessarily, any new forms of media. I think we have kind of what we're going to have for the next 5 to 10 years until there's a technological shift. Certainly whether it's like glasses that people are seeing stuff on or whatever. I don't look at the technologies there for like VR yet or anything, but it's going to be Twitter, it's going to be Instagram, TikTok, so some sort of variation of those types of platforms. But the real big change is going to be in athletes embracing the opportunity they have to be both an athlete and an entity.
Yeah, and I think, guys, I'm going to be mindful of time because they're going to probably want us off stage by 3:30. But both of you were college student athletes, and we could possibly in January have name, image, and likeness rights for 500,000 NCAA student athletes. I'm actually the faculty rep at Syracuse, and they're going to put 500,000 kids out there in the marketplace, very possibly, who are going to be looking to use social media to kind of cash themselves up. And just curious, Paul, about quickly your thoughts on, does that crunch in on the pro players? Because now we're going to have that much wider of an audience of people trying to use social media for their fame and even for, revenue generation.
I think look, you're going to have the star athletes in every sport. Like Zion Williamson post SB 206 is going to get a huge endorsement playing at Duke. But I think for the most part, you have, you call out the 3 to 5% of the biggest athletes in college or college sports. In pro sports, it's the same thing. Like endorsement revenue, there's a pretty huge gap between wealth. You have like the top players in each of their respective disciplines, and then everyone else. And everyone else is a lot of times $20,000 cash deals, sometimes just product deals. And then, the top players, the Tom Brady's of the world, are getting 7-8 figures a year. And so I think similarly in college, there will be players that take some share of wallet, but it's going to be local revenue. I think we'll see more car dealerships investing in their local college teams and those players, and local retail, local restaurants, things of that nature, which will be good. I saw a comment here that I'll add to this, Rick, is that, because of the capabilities given to us with modern tech and media, there is this thought of, okay, we can leverage these resources to develop talent and help maybe lesser known athletes in respective sports to become bigger. I think there's opportunity, but for the same reason, that hasn't happened traditionally. Just because opportunity is there doesn't mean that it will. I think the best leagues and the best teams still view their rosters as talent heads, and you basically have to develop a knack for seeing if younger talent who may be low profile has it or not. And if they do, and there's things that you can identify, which is, a knack for screen, good communication capabilities, are able to capitalize on trend, great in fashion, has a wider subset of hobbies, but more so, and the most important thing, is willing and able to participate in content. And I've talked with everyone from the NFL down. You identify those stars that haven't budded yet because of their willingness to do the kind of stuff that Trevor's doing. And you don't have to be a Cy Young winner if you have that level of call it desire off the field.
Rick, you did such a great job, Rick, but everybody knows, every moderator knows 101, when you're short on time, you never say one more for Rabil.
Yeah.
Never. By the way, Trevor, did you notice the Red Bull product placement? Did you, Trevor? You see what he's doing over there?
Of course.
Nothing gets by. Rick, thank you so much. Great as always. Trevor, thank you. Paul, thank you. We are going to move on to our next group.
Guys, thanks so much.